The judge looked at me over the rim of his glasses and said, "Mrs. Calloway, I've been on this bench for 22 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this." He was holding a single sheet of paper, not the custody petition, not the financial disclosures, not the 40-page character assessment that my ex-husband's attorney had submitted the week before, just one sheet. And the man sitting across the courtroom, the man who had walked out of my hospital room 8 years ago without so much as a goodbye, had gone completely white. I remember thinking, there it is. After everything, after all of it, there it is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Margot. I was 31 years old when my life fell apart, and 39 when I finally understood why it had to. I was a registered nurse, ICU, Mercy General in Cincinnati, 12-hour shifts, rotating nights and days, the kind of job where you go home and your feet hurt so badly, you sit on the edge of the bathtub and just run cold water over them for 10 minutes before you can even think about dinner. I loved it anyway. I loved it the way some people love the ocean, not because it was easy but because it was real. Every day mattered, every single one. I met my husband, Marcus, at a friend's wedding. He was the kind of man who fills a room without trying to. Tall, easy smile, the sort of confidence that reads as warmth until you've known him long enough to understand the difference. I didn't know the difference yet. I was 26 and he was 30, and I thought I had found someone solid. We were married 18 months later, bought a house in Blue Ash, a small colonial with a crooked front porch that I always meant to fix. Had our daughter Evie 2 years after that. She was born in April, small and furious and perfect, and I cried for an hour after they put her in my arms, not from sadness. From the particular terror of loving something that much. For a while, things were fine. Or they looked fine, which I've since learned is a different thing entirely. Then, 13 months after Evie was born, I was in a car accident on I-71 coming home from a night shift. A semi-drifted lanes in the rain. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up in a hospital room. My hospital, actually, which is its own strange kind of surreal. With my left leg in external fixation and a neurosurgeon I'd worked alongside for 6 years, standing at the foot of my bed telling me that the spinal contusion was significant but that I was, in his words, lucky as hell. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like the ceiling had come down. The injury wasn't to the spine itself but to the surrounding tissue and nerves. The kind of damage where the doctors are careful with their words. Where they say we're optimistic instead of you will, and there's every reason to believe instead of I promise. What they told me, gently, over the course of several days, was that I might not walk again the way I used to, that it would take time, that the brain was adaptable, that I would need months of inpatient rehab before we would know anything for certain. Evie was 13 months old. Marcus came to the hospital every day for the first 2 weeks. He brought flowers once, and coffee every other time, and he sat in the chair beside my bed and looked at his phone more than he looked at me. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself anyone would be. The day the doctor walked Marcus through the long-term prognosis, the possibility of permanent partial nerve damage, the likelihood of at least 12 months of intensive rehabilitation, the need for in-home modifications if I returned to the house, I watched my husband's face do something I had never seen it do before. He went very still, not sad, not scared. Just still in the way a person gets still when they're doing math in their head. 3 days later he told me he couldn't do this. I thought he meant the hospital visits, the logistics. I thought I misunderstood. I mean any of it, he said. I'm not built for this, Margot, I'm sorry. He left that evening. He left the hospital, went home to Blue Ash, packed 2 bags and moved into an apartment in Kenwood. His mother took Evie. Not because I asked her to. Because Marcus told her I was indisposed, and she believed him. I spent the next 4 months in inpatient rehabilitation at Drake. I want to be honest about what that was like, because I think people imagine physical rehabilitation as something cinematic. The triumphant moment where you stand up and everyone cheers. The reality is that it's a grind. It is slow and exhausting and humiliating in ways that are hard to describe to someone who hasn't been there. There were days when I couldn't get myself from the bed to the wheelchair without help. There were days when I cried in the shower, sitting on a plastic bench, because I had once run a 10K on a Saturday morning just to clear my head before a double shift, and now I was grateful, genuinely grateful, to have made it to the sink without falling. I worked. That's what I did. I worked harder than I have ever worked at anything. My younger sister Bet drove 40 minutes each way 3 times a week to bring Evie to visit. Evie was 18 months by the time I left Drake, walking herself now, and she used to toddle into the rehab gym and climb onto the parallel bars and try to do what she saw me doing. The therapist thought it was adorable. I thought it might break me apart. My attorney, a woman named Claudette who I found through a colleague, handled the divorce proceedings while I was still inpatient. I signed what I had to sign. Marcus wanted the house sold and the proceeds split. He asked for joint custody of Evie. He did not offer to cover any portion of my rehabilitation costs, which exceeded what insurance paid by a significant amount. He did not ask about my prognosis. He did not, as far as I could tell, feel anything in particular about any of it. The divorce was finalized in February. Evie would spend alternating weeks with each of us. I moved into an apartment in Norwood, ground floor, accessible, 2 bedrooms. With the money from the house sale, and what I had managed to save over years of working doubles. My sister Bet helped me set it up. My physical therapist gave me a list of home exercises. I planted a small herb garden on the patio because I needed something to take care of that could also take care of itself. I walked out of that apartment on my own 2 legs, slowly, with a cane for about 7 months and then without. The nerve damage left me with some residual weakness on the left side that is never fully resolved. I feel it on stairs, on uneven ground, in my left foot on cold mornings. But I walked. I walked back into nursing school to complete a nurse practitioner certification, because my body couldn't handle floor nursing anymore. I walked Evie to kindergarten on her first day. I walked into every single court-mandated custody exchange with Marcus, and I looked him in the eye every time, and I did not say a single thing I couldn't say in front of our daughter. Marcus, for his part, exercised his visitation about 60% of the time in those first 2 years. He remarried. A woman named Petra, I learned from Evie, who liked yoga and didn't like animals, and they had a son together. After the baby arrived, Marcus's custody time dropped further. He would cancel on a Thursday afternoon a few hours before pickup with a text. Something came up. Can we do Sunday instead? And then Sunday would become the following weekend, and the following weekend would become a month. And Evie would sit by the window, and I would have nothing to say to her that felt like enough. I said the things anyway. That her father loved her. That adults sometimes struggled in ways that had nothing to do with the children they loved. That she was not the reason for any of it. I'm not sure I believed all of it, but I said it. By the time Evie was 5, Marcus's visits had become intermittent at best. By the time she was 7, they were mostly holidays. By the time she was 8, he had missed her last 3 birthdays, pulled her from activities twice with no explanation, and called her on the phone perhaps once a month. I did not take him back to court. I did not have the energy, and I did not want Evie to spend her childhood in a courtroom. I kept records. My attorney had advised me to do that from the beginning. Keep a log, dates and times, what was said and what wasn't. I kept a simple notebook in the kitchen drawer. Nothing dramatic, just facts. March 14th, scheduled pickup 4 p.m. cancelled via text at 2:47 p.m. Reason, work thing, that sort of thing. I finished my NP certification when Evie was 6. Started a position at a pediatric practice in Hyde Park. I was good at it. I had always been good at the work. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that I understood now what it meant to be a patient, to be at the mercy of someone else's assessment. That understanding made me better, I think. It made me more careful with people. Evie grew into herself. She was funny and stubborn, and read everything she could get her hands on. She had my sister Bettit's laugh, which was big and sudden, and always a little embarrassing in movie theaters. She was not an easy child, by which I mean she asked hard questions and pushed back and wanted real answers, and I was grateful every day for that, even when it exhausted me. When Evie was 9, she started at a STEM enrichment program at the local library on Saturday mornings. By 10, she was in a regional science competition. By 11, she had won it. I took a photo of her on the stage that day, holding the certificate, squinting a little in the auditorium lights, not quite smiling but close, and I texted it to Marcus with the caption, "Evie won today. She'd love to hear from you." He liked the message, he didn't call. That was September. By November, I had received a letter from an attorney I didn't recognize. Marcus was filing for primary custody. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter for a long time, long enough for my coffee to go cold. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift across the floor. I read it twice, then a third time, because the language was dense, and I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. He was alleging, And I want to be precise here, that my medical history and current physical limitations made me an inconsistent caregiver. That my work schedule was demanding and irregular. That Evie would benefit from a more stable two-parent household. That last phrase sat in my chest like a stone. I called Claudette that evening. She had retired the year before, but she answered anyway, because that's who she was. And she listened while I read her the letter, and when I finished she said, "Margot, do you still have that notebook?" I had 4 notebooks by then, one for each year since the divorce, kept in the kitchen drawer. "Good," she said. "Get yourself a new attorney and bring all 4. She gave me a name, Henry Okafor. Family law, 30 years of experience, had handled cases in Hamilton County for most of his career. His office was downtown on 4th Street, and when I walked in he was already reviewing what Claudette had sent him. He looked up and said, "Tell me about the missed visits." So I did. I told him about the 3 missed birthdays, the canceled pickups, the 2 holidays where Marcus had called the night before to say his plans had changed, the library program Evie had been doing for 2 years that Marcus had never once attended, the science competition. Henry Okafor made notes without looking up. When I finished, he set down his pen and said, "How many overnights has he had in the past 12 months?" I had the exact number because I had the notebook. 11. Out of a possible 52 weeks, he had taken Evie for 11 nights, and in the past 6 months, 3. He looked at me for a moment. "We're going to be fine," he said. Not reassuring, exactly. More like he was relaying information. I drove home and made Evie's dinner and helped her with a science worksheet and read her 2 chapters of the book we were working through together, and I did not tell her anything about the letter. She was 11. She had a science competition trophy on her bookshelf and a loose tooth, and she deserved to not know. Not yet. I cried after she went to sleep. Not for long. I had learned over the years to be efficient about it. The preliminary hearing was in January. Marcus arrived with 2 attorneys. I arrived with Henry. Marcus's lead attorney, a man in an expensive suit who kept touching his cufflinks, made a brief statement about stability and the importance of a 2-parent environment and my documented medical issues. He said the phrase "documented medical issues" 3 times. I counted. Henry asked for Marcus's visitation records. There was a pause. The judge, a man named Judge Whitfield, silver-haired and unhurried, looked over at Marcus's table and said, "Counsel, I'd like to see the petitioner's visitation records from the past 3 years." Marcus's attorney said they would need time to compile those. Henry said we were prepared to submit the respondent's records immediately. He slid 4 notebooks across the table toward the clerk. The full hearing was scheduled for March. I spent the weeks between then and now going to work, picking up Evie from school, helping her prepare for a regional writing contest she had entered on her own initiative, and trying to sleep. I was not always successful at the last one. There is a particular kind of anxiety that lives in the chest in the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning, and I had become well acquainted with it. 2 weeks before the hearing, Henry called me. "I need you to come in," he said. "There's something you should see." I went to his office the next afternoon. He had a document on his desk, a single page, with a header I recognized. It was from Mercy General's Human Resources Department. Specifically, from a voluntary disclosure that Marcus had signed during our divorce proceedings, a financial affidavit in which he had listed his employment history and income. And it was wrong. Not subtly wrong. Significantly wrong, in a way that had been, apparently, overlooked during the original divorce settlement 8 years ago. Marcus had understated his income by a meaningful margin in the year the settlement was finalized, the year he'd been promoted, the year the company's profit sharing had kicked in. The difference between what he'd reported and what his actual W-2 showed was substantial enough to have materially affected the child support calculation. Henry let me sit with that for a moment. "This is from the original proceedings?" I said. "It is, and no one caught it. No one caught it." I looked at the single page on his desk. "Can we use this?" Henry said. "It establishes a pattern of selective disclosure. Yes, we can use it." I want to be honest, in that moment I felt something I'm not particularly proud of. Not vindication exactly. Something colder than that. Something that had been waiting, quietly, for 8 years. The morning of the hearing I dressed carefully. Dark blazer, the one I wore to job interviews. Evie was at school. My sister Bet had come the night before and made dinner and stayed until I made her go home and get some sleep. I drove downtown by myself and parked in the garage on 5th and walked to the courthouse in the March cold. Marcus was already there when I arrived, standing in the hallway with his 2 attorneys. He looked older, I thought, and then immediately felt bad for thinking it. He had put on weight. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He didn't look at me. Henry was waiting near the courtroom door. He said, "You ready?" "Sure," I said. He looked at me for a second. "Margot, you've been ready for years." The hearing began. Marcus's attorney made his case. My medical history, my work schedule, the instability of single-parent life. He had compiled a report from someone described as a family stability consultant. I had never heard that phrase before, and I have not heard it since. Who testified that Evie would benefit from a 2-parent home environment with consistent routines. Henry asked the consultant to define consistent routines. The consultant referenced meal times and bedtimes and extracurricular scheduling. Henry asked whether the consultant had reviewed Evie's academic records. He had not. Henry submitted Evie's academic records. Perfect attendance for 3 years running. Honor roll every semester. Extracurricular activities including the science program, a reading club, a community garden project at the school, the regional science competition ribbon, the writing contest she'd entered last month, which she had placed second in, and which she had entered without telling me until after the deadline because she wanted to do it herself. Henry then asked Marcus's attorney to confirm the number of overnights Marcus had exercised in the past 12 months. Marcus's attorney conferred with his client. They arrived at a figure. It was 14. He said 14. Henry opened the notebooks. The respondent's records indicate 11, he said. I'd like to submit these for review. Judge Whitfield took the notebooks. He read quietly for several minutes. The courtroom was very still. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me and looked at a point just above the judge's head and breathed slowly, the way I had learned to do in rehab when the pain was bad, not to suppress it but to let it pass through. Then Judge Whitfield looked up. He looked first at Marcus, then at his attorneys, then at the single sheet of paper that Henry had placed in front of him. The HR document, the financial affidavit from 8 years ago. "Mr. Calloway," the judge said. Marcus sat up slightly. "I'm looking at a voluntary income disclosure from 2017, Judge Whitfield said, reading from the sheet. "And I'm looking at your W-2 from the same year which your former wife's counsel has subpoenaed from your employer." He paused. "The discrepancy here is approximately $41,000. The room was quiet. "That's not a rounding error," the judge said. Marcus's lead attorney said something about the complexity of profit-sharing structures. Judge Whitfield looked at him with an expression that was not unkind exactly, but that left very little room for interpretation. "Counsel," he said. "I've been on this bench for 22 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this." He set the sheet down. "I'd like to take a brief recess," he said. "And when we return, I'd like to hear from the petitioner directly." The recess was 20 minutes. I walked to the hallway and drank water from a fountain and stood by the window and looked at 4th Street and thought about nothing in particular, which was the only thing I was capable of at that moment. Henry came and stood next to me. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's going to ask you about the accident, about the rehabilitation, about your current functional capacity." "I know, you don't have to perform anything," Henry said. "Just answer what's asked." When we returned, Judge Whitfield asked me to take the stand. He asked about my injury, my recovery, my current position. He asked about my work schedule and how I managed Evie's care around it. I told him about the pediatric practice, about the hours, about the fact that Evie had attended the same school for 4 years, and had the same pediatrician and the same Saturday library program, and the same best friend she'd had since 2nd grade. He asked about the residual effects of my injury. I told him the truth. Some weakness on the left side, managed well, no functional limitations in daily life or professional work. He asked if there was anything else he should know. I said, I kept records of every custody exchange for 8 years, every pickup, every cancellation, every phone call. I kept them because my attorney told me to, and because I believed in doing things right. I'd like the court to have all of them. Henry submitted the 4 notebooks in full. Judge Whitfield looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus, who had been very quiet since the recess. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question. In the past 3 years, how many of your daughter's extracurricular events have you attended?" Marcus conferred briefly with his attorney. "A few," he said. "Can you name one?" There was a pause that lasted longer than it should have. "I believe there was a school event," Marcus said finally. Last spring. Henry quietly placed Evie's school event calendar on the table, the one her school sent home every semester, the one I had kept every copy of. He noted the dates, the events, the sign-in sheets he had subpoenaed from the school. Marcus's name did not appear on any of them. Judge Whitfield looked at the calendar. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the financial affidavit. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Calloway, he said, I'm going to take this matter under advisement, but I want to say something for the record. He paused, and his voice had a quality to it that I've thought about many times since. Not theatrical, just plain. The court does not look favorably on petitions for custody modification that are filed without a commensurate history of engagement. A parent who seeks to expand their role in a child's life is commendable. A parent who seeks to expand their legal rights without first demonstrating the responsibility those rights entail is asking this court to reward absence. That is not something I am prepared to do. Marcus's attorney started to speak. We're adjourned, Judge Whitfield said. The ruling came 6 weeks later, in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday, while I was between patients. Primary custody remained with me. Unchanged. The court had additionally ordered a review of the original child support calculation in light of the income discrepancy identified during proceedings. Marcus would be required to appear for a supplemental hearing. There was a final paragraph that I read 3 times. It noted that Evie, now 11, had submitted a letter to the court. A letter that the court had accepted as part of the record. A letter I had not known she was writing. I called Henry from the parking lot. Did you know about the letter? I said. I knew she'd asked to submit one, he said. She called my office herself. I couldn't tell you. It was submitted under seal until the ruling. She called your office herself, I said. She is, Henry said, a very impressive kid. I sat in my car for a while. The letter itself was sealed. I would never read its contents, and I didn't need to. I knew my daughter. I knew how she thought and how she chose her words, and what she believed was worth fighting for, because she had learned those things somewhere, and I knew where. I texted my sister Bet. It's over. We're okay. She called me immediately and cried loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and I laughed. Really laughed, the kind that surprises you. And then I cried a little too, there in the parking lot, and then I drove home to pick up Evie from school. She was standing at the edge of the sidewalk with her backpack on and her hair coming out of her ponytail, which it always was by 3:30, and she saw my car and started walking before I'd fully stopped. She got in and dropped her bag at her feet and buckled her seatbelt. How was your day? I said. Fine, she said. Mrs. Patterson gave us a pop quiz in math that nobody was ready for. She paused. How was yours? Better, I said. She looked at me, 11 years old, with my mother's eyes and my stubbornness and her own particular way of seeing through things. Okay, she said. I pulled out of the pickup line and drove toward home. Can we get tacos? She said. Yes, I said. We can absolutely get tacos. And she put her feet up on the dashboard the way she always did when she was in a good mood, even though I always told her not to, and I didn't say anything about it this time. I just drove.